Hey guys, Pike here. This is your Unit 11 Endo video number 1. So it's all going to be about the introductory information about the endocrine system, and we're going to get into hormone function. So let's jump right in. We're going to indicate the important differences between hormonal and neural controls over body functioning, and then we're going to list the major endocrine organs, and we're going to describe their locations. So first, let's look at the endocrine system and let's compare it with the nervous system. So the endocrine system, along with the nervous system, the endocrine system helps to regulate and coordinate all your body activities. And so the nervous system would be considered like the president of a company, and the endocrine system would be the vice president. And they control the body in different ways. The nervous system regulates homeostasis via electrochemical signals. Those are the nerve impulses, and the organs that they stimulate respond in milliseconds. So it's a very quick action. Like when you touch a hot stove and you pull your hand away, it's very, very quick, the response by the nervous system, okay, to your organs. But the endocrine system also helps to influence homeostasis, how we keep a stable internal environment, all of our metabolism, chemical reactions, via hormones, not an electrochemical nerve impulse. Here, it's a hormone, which is slower acting, but the effects on the organs is longer lasting. So here we're talking about things like your growth and development. And we know that doesn't happen really quickly, okay? We know that happens over a period of years. So that is hormone. That is endocrine system, okay? So nervous system is very quick. Endocrine system is slower, but the effects of the endocrine system is longer lasting. So let's get into these hormones just a little bit. Hormones are chemical messengers. So really they're just taking a note, and they're passing notes. Like they're just the messenger, taking that note from one place to another. And these hormones are secreted by cells, and they just ooze out into the extracellular fluids, into the surrounding area outside the cell, extracellular. Okay? These messengers are going to travel through the bloodstream. They are taken up by the bloodstream, and they help to regulate the metabolic function of other cells. So they go out into the bloodstream to go to find their target, their cell that they need to deliver the message to. All right? The binding of that hormone, so when that hormone goes out into the bloodstream, it is going to bind to cellular receptors, and that initiates some type of response that typically occurs over a lag period of seconds or even days. Hormones ultimately target most cells of the body, producing widespread and diverse effects. So that hormone is sent out into the bloodstream, and it is trying to find its match. So the hormone has a certain shape on it. The cellular receptors on the plasma membrane have a certain shape. So they have to fit together. Kind of like that toy you had as a baby, that little, I think it's a Fisher-Price toy. And it's a round toy. And it has all these holes in it, different shaped holes. And you had these different shaped blocks that you had to fit the square block into the square hole. So that's what these hormones are doing. They're going around to try to find their perfect match. And so they are going to have a target. So then let's talk a little bit about that target for just a second. So the endocrine gland, an endocrine gland, and I know this kind of might sound violent, but let's just think maybe not. Let's talk about it looking like a gun or acting like a gun. We can say it's a water gun. Okay, guys? And that endocrine gland is going to secretes a hormone. So that gun will shoot a bullet. Or we'll shoot water if we're trying to be nonviolent, right? We can just maybe talk about a paint gun, bullet, okay? And that hormone is sent out to a target. Okay, it's not going to be sent out and whatever cell wants to take it, takes it. It has a target. So your bullet, say you're shooting at a target. You know that water gun game at the fair? You're making that thing go up and you try to win? Okay, so you're shooting at a target. And so when you hit that target, there is some type of response by that target. It causes the target to do something, causes the cell to change its metabolism. Here, there's also a response. So if you're shooting at a target and you have an actual like BB gun, there's going to be a hole in that target. Something happens to that target. Okay? So that's a very good example of that. Now, the scientific study of hormones and endocrine organs is endocrinology. And once you see how many different glands and hormones there are, and how many different functions they regulate, that is a huge field. So an endocrinologist has a wide vast of knowledge. Endocrine organs are very small. They're unimpressive in their anatomy. They're widespread anywhere from your brain all the way down your torso, and they are actually not connected in any way. They're not connected. Endocrine system is a system that's not connected. Some systems that are connected, their organs are connected, will be like digestive system, the GI tract, gastrointestinal tract, from stomach to anus. The respiratory tract, from your nasal cavity all the way to your lungs. The urinary system, it's connected from your kidneys all the way out to your urethra. This system is not connected. The only thing these organs have in common is they all secrete hormones, but they secrete hormones that do vastly different things. So endocrine glands are ductless glands, meaning they do not have a duct that carries, or a tube that carries their substance away, like a sweat gland or an oil gland. Endocrine glands don't need that, so they just spit out their hormones and it just oozes out into the surrounding tissues. Okay? All right, so looking at the location of these endocrine organs, we're going to start up here, superior to inferior, and the first one is called the pineal gland. It's in your brain, it's towards the back, the pineal gland. Next, we have an actual brain structure, but it also produces two hormones, so it's in two different systems, and that's your hypothalamus. The hypothalamus. The hypothalamus produces two hormones that's secreted by the little gland that hangs off of it, and that's called your pituitary. And then let's move down, and that's all that's in the brain. Let's move down to the neck, to the cervical region. And what looks like a little bow tie, that is your thyroid, the thyroid gland. On the posterior aspect of the thyroid, or just on the back of it, there are 4 polka dots. Looks like a polka dotted bow tie. And those 4 polka dots are the parathyroid. Moving on down into your thoracic cavity in the chest, you have the thymus gland. Moving on down now, we have glands that sit on the superior aspect of the kidneys, and those are your adrenals, the adrenal glands. In between the kidneys, you have your pancreas. Pancreas is a gland secreting hormones. And then you have the collective gonads, but female gonads, and a gonad is just a sex organ that secretes the sex hormones and the sex cells. So for females, we have the female ovaries, and the male is the testes. One would be testis, okay? And so collectively, those are the gonads. All right, so that's the location of all your glands. Now, let's look down here. We're going to get into the physiology for just a minute, okay? So you got to hang with me. So we're going to look at how does a hormone, once it reaches its target cell, how does it make that cell do anything? How does it get it off the couch and stop being a couch potato and do something? Well, it all depends on the hormone's solubility in water. And so first, we're going to look at the 2 different types of hormones. So we have amino acid-based hormones. The amino acid-based hormones. That's most of our hormones are amino acid-based, and they are water-soluble, soluble in water, And since they are water soluble, they cannot pass the plasma membrane. If you remember, the plasma membrane is a hydrophobic. Do you remember this from bio? I know it's been a couple of years, unless you've had AP. Hydrophobic phospholipid bilayer. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you, but remember, hydrophobic is water hating. And so if something is water soluble, it can't pass through that phospholipid bilayer because it's water hating. Okay, it just bounces off. It won't come in. It can't come in. Cannot pass that phospholipid bilayer. So that hormone has to do something a little different. It can't get inside the cell, so it has to start its reaction outside the cell. Then there are some hormones that are steroid-based hormones. And these are synthesized from cholesterol. They are lipid soluble, so they can cross that plasma membrane, that phospholipid bilayer. So they can get into the cell. So they cause their response inside the cell. So they act a little different. Hormones are going to circulate to all body tissues, but a hormone is going to influence and alter the activity of only those tissue cells that have receptors for it. So I've kind of hit on that, like the shapes. And those cells are going to be called the target cells. Okay. Even though that hormone is flowing through the bloodstream, it only can cause a response in the target cells that have receptors for it. How a hormone communicates with a target cell, we're going to first look at the water-soluble hormones. The water-soluble hormones, these are the ones that cannot pass through the plasma membrane. The water-soluble hormones have to act on receptors in the plasma membrane. Remember, they cannot pass through that hydrophobic bilayer. And so they bind to that plasma membrane and they exert their signaling effects on intracellular second messengers. So really, they brought a note to that target cell, a message. So they can't deliver the note themselves all the way inside the cell. They have to pass it off to someone, a certain second messenger on the plasma membrane, who will then take that message into the cell. So it's just like passing a note, okay, or passing the baton. So here is where we're going to dive into the physiology. We're going to look at the steps of how a water-soluble hormone causes its response in the cell. And so, y'all, this is heavy physiology. So what happens in a physiological process? You have to have step 1, which triggers step 2, triggers step 3, and so on. It's like a domino effect. The first domino, if it does not fall, the second domino won't either. It has to be first domino fall, then second, then third. That is how every physiological process occurs in our body. So it is actually called the cyclic ANP signaling mechanism. And you'll see when we get into that. I know that sounds very foreign to you. But let's see. Let's take that hormone, and it gets to its target cell, and it finds its match. Okay, it has receptors on the target cell. Step 1 is that hormone. And we call the hormone the first messenger, because that hormone is the first one that has the note. So he's the first messenger. Okay, the endocrine gland gave the hormone a message to go and send to a target cell. That hormone, the first messenger, binds to the receptor on the plasma membrane. I'm going to go over to on the plasma membrane, I write so big, sorry, of the target cell. So it gets to the target, realizes they're a match, and it binds to a receptor in the plasma membrane, okay, or on the plasma membrane, because we can't go inside the cell. So once we bind to that, once the hormone binds, we can now go to step 2. That receptor, okay, so we're going to pass off the note to that receptor in the plasma membrane. The receptor activates something called the G protein. Stay with me, heavy physiology here, okay? That receptor binds to the G protein, and GDP bound to the G protein is displaced by GTP. This causes the G protein to move down the plasma membrane to an enzyme. So we're going to look at that in the picture in just a minute. So let's just fill in our steps, okay? So we're actually pulling off a G off of the to pull down, okay? It's displaced, it's pulled away, okay? So now step 3. Now we've got G protein. So now G protein has the message. So we start step 3 with G protein. See, we're just passing off the message, passing off the baton, okay, like it's a relay race. G protein, once it travels down the plasma membrane, activates another molecule called adenylate cyclase. Adenylate cyclase. Adenylate cyclase. I know, weird words today, okay? And this is the effector enzyme, okay? It's going to help cause that effect in the cell. So it's an enzyme, a catalyst, okay? All right, so next, step 4. Now adenylate cyclase has the note. So we start the next step with adenylate cyclase. This is our effector enzyme. Adenylate cyclase, its job is it converts ATP, the energy molecule, into something called, not ADP, we're converting it into cyclic AMP. Okay, cyclic AMP. And here, cyclic AMP is the second messenger. It is considered to be the second main molecule that gets the note. Okay, these other ones are just kind of the go-betweens. Okay, so now adenylate cyclase converts ATP to something called cyclic AMP. That's where we get the name for this whole process. Now, step 5, cyclic AMP, which we can also convert and say that is, you can also call it CAMP, little c, big AMP. But it's also called CAMP. So I'm going to start the next one. Now CAMP, second messenger, has the note. CAMP then activates protein kinase. CAMP activates protein kinase. So when CAMP activates protein kinase, it signals a cascade of chemical reactions in the cell, activating enzymes, maybe stimulating cellular secretions, opening ion channels, causes some type of effect in the cell. But it took all 5 of these steps to get the message into the cell to cause the cell to have a response. Okay, so let's now look at look here. But I want to talk just a second about this right here. Okay, so this protein kinase, okay, it's actually an enzyme that does something called, it phosphorylates. Oh, no, that's supposed to be a Y. It phosphorylates proteins. So it alters proteins. And what that just means is we're just adding a phosphate group. When it talks about phosphorylating proteins, we're just adding a phosphate group. But it causes some kind of effect in the cell. Okay, I just wanted to elaborate a little bit about protein kinase, but not spending too much time because we could talk about it for a little while. So let's get down into in here. So when you phosphorylate a protein, you either activate it, the cell, or you inhibit the cell. Like it either starts something or stops something. Okay, that's the protein kinase's job. Okay, so now let's look at the actual diagram. So I know this looks kind of weird, and you've got these little funky dudes right here. Okay, dudes, chicks, whatever. Okay, and so really it looks like a relay race. So exactly like a relay race. Any physiological process. So one molecule passes the message to the other, to the other, to the other. Okay, so let's label our molecules here. So first, the first one is the hormone. Let's write really small. And the hormone is the first messenger. He's the first one with the baton. Okay, you see they're passing off the baton, the second and third right here. So hormone is called the first messenger, and it's going to bind to a receptor on the plasma membrane, because remember, can't get inside the cell. This is a water-soluble hormone, and it can't pass that hydrophobic phospholipid bilayer. Then the receptor passes off the baton to G protein. G protein then passes off the baton to adenylate cyclase. Adenylate cyclase passes off the message to cyclic AMP or CAMP, which here is our second messenger. Consider the second person, or the second main molecule that has the message, okay? Because that's what's going to put it to activating protein kinase, which causes the response, okay? So it's kind of like the first person with the message and the last person with the message before the effect happens. All right, so those are our people. Those are our relay race people. Same shape in the picture, okay? That's why I'm so in love with this picture, because of the, you can see that they're all the same shape. Every molecule has a different shape here. So we're going to start up here. So step 1, and we're just going to briefly write it out again. Hormone binds to receptor. Okay, remember our hormone was the pink circle. And so that pink circle went around in the bloodstream until it found a cell that has the same shape on its plasma membrane. So this is the target cell, right? So we know that the pink circle is the hormone. Okay, and so this purple right here is our receptor. Remember, same shape as our relay race up here. Okay, but let's make sure we know when we look at this picture that that is the hormone, the purple is the receptor. That's step 1. We're binding. Okay, so then step 2 is down here. So we've got step 2. The receptor activates, because now the receptor has the message, right? So the receptor activates G protein. Okay, so let's put our people in. The blue we see up here from our relay race. The blue is something called the G protein. And how it activates it is we have GDP, we have GTP, okay? And so it's going to cause that to bounce off, okay? So it gives it a little energy to bounce off. And so now that G protein travels. So now he has the message. So he has to take it to someone else. So he bounces off of that receptor and he travels down that phospholipid bilayer, okay? And we see all these little people, like all these little phospholipids, and it's a bilayer, remember, and they're hydrophobic, so can't get through. So now, what we have is now it's got GTP, and it's traveling down. Now, step 3. Now we start with G protein, because G protein has the message. So G protein activates. Okay, now we've got this lighter purple, right? And up here in our relay race, we said that that was adenylate cyclase. It's an enzyme. All right, G protein activates adenylate cyclase. And so we still have GTP here. And now we bind with that adenylate cyclase. I know we've written that several times. Got to get it into our brain. Adenylate cyclase. Okay, so now adenylate cyclase, that enzyme has the message. So now step 4, we start with adenylate cyclase. You see how whichever step ends, the next one begins with that same one, because that's who has the message. That's who has the baton. Adenylate cyclase is going to converts ATP, our energy molecule, okay, it requires energy for this step, into cyclic AMP or CAMP. Make sure your C is little. Cyclic AMP. And that is our second messenger. Okay, the last one that has the message before it causes an effect in the cell. And so what I have here is I have an ATP. Energy's coming in to convert it to CAMP, to cyclic AMP. And so that causes step 5. Step 5 is CAMP, that second messenger, is going to activate protein kinase. Activates protein kinase. Protein kinase is what phosphorylates our proteins, activates them or inhibits them. So what we have here is we have an inactive protein kinase. And now here we have an active one. We're not going to get too much in the anatomy of that right there, but the inactive versus active. And so here we're actually triggering the response. Triggers response in target cell. So this is actually what it's telling the cell to do, whether it's to secrete its own secretions, open an ion channel and let, say, glucose in from the bloodstream, if we're talking about insulin. So all 5 of these steps have to happen when that hormone binds to the receptor to cause any kind of effect in the cell. So this is what happens when you cannot get in the cell. The protein or the hormone can't get in. Okay? So I know that's major, all right? So now we're going to go down and look at what happens if the hormone can get into the cell. And then it's a lipid-soluble hormone. Lipid-soluble hormone. Okay? So first, remember it's made of steroid. That steroid hormone diffuses through plasma membrane, through the plasma membrane, and binds to an intracellular receptor. Binds to an intracellular receptor. So it can get in the cell, okay? It's lipid soluble, made of steroids, okay? And so now we're inside the cell. Now it's called a receptor hormone complex. Because now he's not really passing off the message. He finds a friend to bind to help him take him to where he needs to go. The hormone says, no, I'm supposed to take this message all the way in myself. Okay, so the receptor's just helping. That now they're bound together, the hormone and the receptor. Now that enters the nucleus. Okay. Step 3, that complex, that receptor hormone complex, is going to bind. Now it's inside the nucleus, binds to specific DNA region. Because we're in the nucleus. So, hey, we're going all the way to the control center, okay, with this message. That binding of that receptor hormone complex to a specific DNA region, that binding initiates transcription of a gene into messenger RNA. We're not going to get a whole lot back into transcription. You learn that in biology. But that binding is going to initiate that transcription of that gene into messenger RNA. So now, messenger RNA is going to direct protein synthesis. Okay, so different steps here because the hormone can get into the cell. All right? And so the proteins produced include enzymes that promote some type of metabolic activity to happen inside the cell. So let's go ahead and do our little labeling. Okay, so what we have first, different little shapes here, different colors. So here's our hormone, looks like a piece of corn. And look, it has a certain shape on it, like a puzzle piece, right? And so this right here is our plasma membrane, that purple. inside the cell, what looks like the rest of like a piece of candy corn, that is our receptor. And the receptor's inside the cell because this hormone can get right in, okay? And so step 1 is the hormone, okay, diffuses into and binds to receptor. We don't need to write so much out right anymore, okay? And so once they bind, they're called the receptor hormone complex. The receptor hormone complex, okay? So that's what's happening right here. Goes through the plasma membrane, binds to a receptor, now they're a complex. The hormone's like, I'm not leaving this message, okay? I was told to take it all the way into the nucleus, okay? So step 2. Step 2 is that complex enters the nucleus, all right? And so here we have just DNA right here. Okay. And here just where we're binding. Okay, we're pointing to this is where it's binding. So step 3, that complex, once it enters the nucleus, is going to bind to a specific region on the DNA. Now step 4, I feel like I'm screaming. Sorry, the heat was on. I talk really loud, I'm sorry. Turn my volume down. Step 4 is we have transcription of a gene into messenger RNA. Getting into your biology, okay? Transcription of a gene. And so what we have here is we have messenger RNA. Step 5. That messenger RNA triggers protein synthesis. That messenger RNA triggers protein synthesis. And so now you have a new protein. That new protein is going to trigger some type of effect in that cell. Okay? And so those are the steps of a lipid-soluble hormone. So let me go ahead and finish out this hormone release stimuli real quick, because I know this video is kind of longer because of those physiological processes. That's why I split up this unit into 4 videos. This is video 1. So now that we know how a hormone actually causes that effect on the cell, what causes the hormone to be released in the first place? So the synthesis and release of most hormones is all controlled by negative feedback. If you remember, in our very first unit, Unit 1, we talked about homeostasis, how our body maintains a relatively stable internal environment. Remember, we're not robots. And so negative feedback is how, when we get away from our equilibrium, our balance, how our body brings us back to a stable teeter-totter. And so this right here was a picture of a double negative feedback loop. And so this is put with the endocrine system, okay? So let's look. 3 ways that a hormone is triggered to secrete is triggered to secrete its own hormones, okay? And so the first type of stimulation is called humoral stimulation. Humoral stimulation. Okay? And that is where an endocrine gland is triggered to secrete its hormones in direct response to changing blood levels of certain ions and certain nutrients. And so the word humor is Latin for body fluids. They used to, pre-Renaissance, think that we were all controlled by our humors. Humors are your body fluid, so blood, urine, bile, lymph fluid. And they thought that, well, if you were sick, well, your humors are off. So maybe you don't have enough blood. So here, let's give you some more. And they didn't know about blood typing yet. So if it killed you, they're like, oh, well, I guess we didn't give you enough, right? And so obviously we've learned a lot since then. But the word humor is still around. So this is a perfect example of negative feedback. Negative feedback. And that's what this picture is. It's showing that if your blood glucose level gets too high, like you eat a bunch of Airheads for breakfast, It triggers your pancreas to secrete insulin, which causes your cells to take in that glucose, and then it brings it back to normal. But if you don't eat breakfast and you don't eat lunch and your blood glucose is very low and you're very weak, it triggers the pancreas to secrete a different hormone called glucagon, which causes the liver, targets the liver. The liver stores excess sugar for us to give us some to bring us back up. So that is humoral stimulation. A lot of these are going to be humorally stimulated, these glands. The second way an endocrine gland is triggered to secrete its hormone is through neural stimulation. Neural stimulation. This is where a nerve fiber from the nervous system, from the president, is going to come down and tell the vice president what to do. So nerve fibers will stimulate an endocrine gland to secrete hormones. Okay, so this is when the boss comes. Hey, you work at Sonic, it's not your assistant manager or store manager, it's the district manager. District manager comes in and tells you to do something. Okay? And then the third way an endocrine gland is stimulated to secrete its hormone is through hormonal stimulation. Hormonal stimulation. Okay, stay with me just another minute, okay? I know this is getting longer. Many glands release their hormones in response to other hormones produced by other glands. So this is when these hormones are called boss hormones. Really, their only job in life is to tell another gland to secrete its hormone. So this is like if you work at, I don't know, I keep saying Sonic because a lot of y'all work there. But if you're at Sonic, it's like your manager. Like he's sitting on his butt and he's like, okay, go, work faster. Go do this. Go do fountain. Go do whatever. And they don't do anything. So their only job, these hormones' only job is to tell another gland to secrete its hormones. So it's kind of like an in-between boss, right? And their hormones are actually called tropic hormones. So tropic, that's a boss hormone. So you'll see tropic in some of the names of these hormones. And when you see tropic, you're like, ooh, dude, that's a boss. That's all he does is boss other people around. He doesn't do anything himself. Okay? And so if you look here at this little diagram, we have humoral stimulus here. That's when a hormone release is caused by certain ions and nutrients getting off in our blood. Neural stimulus is where a hormone release is caused by neural input from the nervous system, from the president of the body. And hormonal stimulus is where hormone release is caused by another hormone. A tropic hormone tells another gland what to do. Okay, so I'm going to stop right here. We're going to jump into the pituitary in our next video. Okay, Pike out.